Welcome to the first episode of the How to Go Independent podcast. I hope this will be the first of many episodes. My goal is to be your guide to help you decide how, if, and when to go independent, or if you're already independent, to help you get ideas from other advisors that will interview and get some insights on how they might apply to your practice. Again, this will be me talking quite a bit about myself because I want to make sure that I establish kind of my background so you hear why and how I got into this idea that I could have some value in explaining the independent practice model or models to other people. I really enjoy it. I hope that comes across. And I know when I listen to something, I want to know why the person delivering the information has any credibility. So that's my goal with this first episode. Hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions about my story or me, feel free to link up with me. You can also find us at howtogoindependent.com. And I've got a special request of you, or asking for a favor and some input at the end of the episode, so stick around for that, and thank you for listening. Welcome to episode 1 of How to Go Independent. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to sharing my insights and knowledge on how to take your investment or financial planning practice from an employee model to an independent model. I have been excited to start this project, and I hope it will be helpful for you and hope it's educational. I want to spend this first shot to just give you a little bit of background on why I decided to start this and why I think I'm qualified to provide information that should be useful and at a minimum educational and hopefully somewhat interesting if you have any curiosity about the other side of sort of our business. My name is Sean Kernan. I'm based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've family's lived here since 1987. I have been a financial advisor for 13 years. A little bit more about my background. I grew up in the suburb of Coppell, right outside Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Went to West Point and was an Army officer upon graduation for 5 years. And I spent most of that 5 years trying to figure out what field I wanted to go into when my service commitment was over. I didn't plan to be a career officer. So I spent a lot of time listening to other people talk about what they did at various networking meetings. And I always had an interest in personal finance. So I had considered going back to get an MBA and going to either investment management or corporate finance. But I really liked the people side of the financial planning arena, and that sounded interesting to me. And when I understood the ability to build your own business, so to speak, within the confines of a bigger organization, that really appealed to me. I started investigating my choices in the fall of 2001, and as I was getting out of the Army in the spring of 2002. I interviewed with one company and was ready to take their offer because they had a franchise program where you could go off and do your own thing after a few years. And then someone mentioned that they thought A.G. Edwards or Edward Jones did that right away, or at least gave you your own office. And sure enough, Edward Jones, as you may know, each advisor has their own office, and that appealed to me. The independent part of me that would come out later was very much in play, and I liked that model, and it worked well. So I started the business in the fall of 2002, or got my licenses in the spring of 2002. And got going near the bottom of the market, which ended up being lucky for me, of course, as my first clients did very well when the market turned up later that year, and especially the following year. Spent 3 years at Edward Jones and did fairly well and won a couple of their trips and got comfortable with the idea of sort of the sales training idea. And I, coming from the Army, West Point with I was an economics major, but you had to minor in engineering discipline. So I kind of had more of an engineering-minded process-oriented thought when I came into the business. And Jones was great for the sales training and sort of the business development aspects. And it worked well for me, and I was in my hometown, which I think helped, and the market was doing well. And sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and I think I was blessed to be in the right spot at the right time and worked hard and did pretty well, and door knocked, as that was the way they did things. That was hard and challenging, but it worked well enough to get some relationships started. One of the unintended consequences of that was that I met other people in our industry. I try to go out late afternoon or early evenings when more people would be home, because my town was fairly tilted a little younger. So I went, and this was in the summer and spring. I went out. It was light until almost 9 o'clock at the peak of the summer, so it was easy to be out later. So anyways, I met a couple people that would become instrumental in kind of my decisions later, one of whom was a Naval Academy grad, and I made sure I mentioned West Point in my door knocking conversations. So he gave me some water and I think invited me in. We chatted a little bit. And then later I met another independent advisor, and they were both working from home, and so it piqued my interest, and it was interesting to know that existed. But I went about my business and started building the core of my practice. And I did get a call from a recruiter from a large independent broker-dealer from the Naval Academy grad, had given them my name. And so I talked to the recruiter and listened, and obviously it was hard to do anything with that information in the first year in the business. Didn't want to jump ship without having really established myself. But I started to play with the numbers and build spreadsheets and ask questions of a few people and read up industry magazines and such. So I just soaked up whatever I could about the business in addition to building my client base. And I enjoyed reading about the business. I enjoyed talking to other people. And I talked to the Merrill Lynch branch manager. I met at least one advisor from Merrill Lynch, and interviewed with them. Near the time my salary was running out, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything, and there was no reason to make a change. So I explored a little bit fairly early in my career, even though I was doing fine from a business standpoint. And I found that most of us, I think, just go along doing what we need to do and don't necessarily look around. And that might have distracted me from building the business at times, but I did enough prospecting and working and learning the business to do fine from a production standpoint as well. So after about 2.5 years, I had continued on that path and had learned more. And of course, various people and classmates had left as they didn't quite get there, or for whatever reason they left. As you probably know in our business, as people fall out of a training class, and some would go to a bank brokerage, or some would go to a wirehouse training program, or some would go to wherever they went. I'd ask them, hey, how do you like it? What made you choose that place? And so I've always been curious about the different channels in our industry. And I was getting to the point where at that time Edward Jones didn't offer any advisory-based platforms, and they were very focused on mostly A-share mutual funds or other transactional business. And that just seemed like over time that was going to be a hard business to sustain for me. The way I did things, I preferred to be as consultative as possible. And it just seemed like it would be a never-ending treadmill looking down 20, 30 years of having to get new clients or move stuff around. And I know that a lot of people do a great job for their clients that way, but that didn't seem exciting to me. And the more I learned about the industry, I liked the idea of getting paid to take care of people's money instead of getting more of it or moving it around. And that was one of the things that pushed me to look harder and look at the different options. So I considered independence after 2.5, 3 years in the business. So this would have been 2005. But I also realized that would be probably a little bit risky, and I didn't have a lot of recurring revenue. The only recurring revenue I had would have been mutual fund trail revenue. So not a ton to rely on. I came across an article in, I think it was Registered Rep magazine, by a recruiter writing about the different deals that advisors got. And I think this article mentioned that Morgan Stanley was offering, I think they call it the Rising Star program, where they would basically give a fairly new advisor a significant transition package for 2 to 5 years in the business, someone who's already established themselves or at least made it look like they would survive in the business. The rationale being, let's try to just pay someone who's already demonstrated some success, even if it's only for a few years. Let's pay them handsomely to move over instead of training people, which is a bit of a crapshoot, and the success rate historically has not been very high. Why not just spend the money on the people that appear to have some potential? So I investigated that and reached out to the author and the recruiter, and she said, yeah, indeed, that I would be a candidate for that. Went and met with a Morgan Stanley, I think he was a area or complex sales manager, and to my surprise, he was a West Point grad, which I thought had been set up, but sure enough, that was his role. So that was interesting, and I didn't know what that meant, but it got my attention. And so I listened, and I decided after a few months of deliberating to make the move to Morgan Stanley in July of 2005 to have more capabilities, a bigger brand name to the average civilian out there that's not in the business, and importantly to have advisory platform options as well as a nice transition package. At that time, it was 100% of my trailing 12 revenue, which was $189,000, right at the end of my third year in production. So that gave me a nice cushion to be able to start to focus on recurring revenue and not sweat so much, how much money I made in any given month. My wife Erica was a school teacher, and that was a phenomenal help in me building the business. She had a steady income, and I didn't have to worry about, from a paying the bills standpoint, I didn't have to make all the money in the household. We didn't have any kids at the time. That obviously gave me the ability to focus mostly on building the business, which is not easy, as you probably know. So anyways, that was a good move. It was fairly successful, probably brought over 80 to 85% of my asset base after 9 to 12 months. In fact, I had an asset-based bonus, got another smaller check. So that was great. That did, of course, come with some strings attached, a 5-year commitment, forgivable loan as those deals were structured. So it was great, but I knew it was not a end-all, be-all. But it worked well for me, and I was able to use it to slowly but surely gravitate towards recurring revenue versus purely transactional like I had built the first few years. So anyway, I had again learned a little bit more about independence in that time when I was looking at other firms, or at least looking at Morgan Stanley, and decided it was a little early in the career, and I could always do it later. And the cash was hard to beat. It reduced the risk. Over time, I think I've evolved into a little bit more of a kind of entrepreneurial type, but I do have kind of a risk aversion when it comes to those kinds of decisions. I don't like to be wrong. I don't like to have to go backwards. So I was fairly cautious, and having the upfront money did take a lot of risk off the table, because even if it blew up in my face, I would have time to figure out what to do next. But luckily it went well, and that money I did use that over time largely to help me convert the business to more recurring revenue, advisory, and more ongoing trail business versus upfront. So I got to work moving the book and spent the next couple of years basically moving it over, getting settled, learning the systems, doing more advisory business, continuing to learn about the business. But I certainly was focused, as you can imagine, in a transition of getting people over and working on the business. And about 2 years in, I remember thinking, I forget what came up, but I had been in contact with the independent recruiter, so they would keep in touch. And about 2 years in, I got a call, and I said, yeah, I'll have lunch with you, and re-engage the conversations. It was a 5-year deal, but I tend to think fairly long-term, so time flies, and I wanted to keep in touch in case I was ready at the end of the 5 years. And that was 2007, so we're getting near the market peak. So as 2008 unwound, back to focusing on the craziness that ensued and making sure do the best job for your clients that you can. But I was continuing to investigate and learn, and from time to time I'd call an advisor off an independent firm's website and just ask them questions out of the blue, and most were fairly open and willing to share, and I appreciated that, and that's another reason I want to do this. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people may be nervous to make the reach out because it's as far as I'm aware, there's no real central resource for this kind of information, especially for someone that's in the middle of practicing in the kind of the independent financial advisor space. There's plenty of information maybe in the RIA only or financial planning focused, someone that's never really worked in the employee side of the world, or from a wirehouse or Edward Jones, Raymond James, big name, large firm. I thought I was just as qualified as anyone with the interest I have in it to do it. That's why I'm here. So I continued to learn, and over time I probably talked to, emailed, or met with about 15 different advisors from large independent firms. And they all had their different approach, and I'd pepper them with questions like, how did you decide on your office space? How did you pick your staff? Or do you need staff? Or how much do you need? Do you pay them W-2? Do you pay them 1099? How much do you pay them? What do you have them do? How good is the technology? What kind of platforms do you use? A lot of things that you could find out from reading. Some of that you could find out from reading the various brochures, but I wanted to hear from people that were actually doing it and didn't have an incentive to sell me on how great it was. And I really enjoyed that, and I learned a lot. And as I got closer to making the decision, I started to ask more detailed questions about, okay, how do you choose how you affiliate with a certain firm, and why do you choose that, and what's your payout look like if you do different options, and what are the implications? And so I really enjoyed that time and kind of got fired up about the process, looking at moving. So I really accelerated that in the fall of 2008 when it was about a year out. It occurred to me that I could probably leave after the 4th year if I was willing to pay back 1 year of the note. So I at least considered that option. And then in the early 2009, so here we are 4.5 years or 3.5 years into my time at Morgan Stanley, in the middle of that kind of financial crisis, Morgan Stanley basically bought/merged with Smith Barney. And where I was, I knew that Smith Barney's office was far nicer than ours. It was bigger. So I knew we'd be moving offices. And one of the big things that I've enjoyed since I've been independent, which is now 6 years as I record this, is the ability to, if I want to move, I get to decide when and where to move. And that To me, that's a big, I don't know, benefit of being independent. I just enjoy it tremendously. So that was one of the timing initiatives was I didn't want to move twice. If I was going to move, I was going to do when I wanted to and where I wanted to, and that was important to me. I actually linked up with the Naval Academy grad that I met knocking on his door in 2002. Turned out he had hired an assistant in the meantime, and she had gotten licensed, and I said, does she have any capacity? And I think I emailed him this, and within an hour, she had either emailed or called me and said, yep, let's talk. I started trying to figure out how I would use her talents and skill. And so, long story short, about 6 months after the bottom of the market in 2009, in the fall of 2009, September 3rd, to be exact, I made the change and joined an independent firm. It was a colleague. We went together as we had started to work together. And she was older than me, so someday we figured that I would be a good succession plan candidate for her business. So we made the change, and it's been phenomenal as far as I'm concerned ever since. My business is not the largest producer, but I'm fairly comfortable with where I am in terms of my business. And I get to work with the clients I want to get to work with. I want to work with, get to pick where I office, how I work, when I work, what kind of platforms I use. Certainly the compliance world is not, and there's still plenty of oversight in our business, as there should be. And that's not gotten any less so here recently. But other than that, I know that's everywhere. And having control of who I hire, when I hire them, what I wear, what they wear, how much I pay them, the culture we create, all these things that just are incredibly exciting to me. I wanted to share that with others. And some people might not value them the way I did, but I think in a lot of cases it wouldn't occur to people what you can do because it's so different than the employee world where, as in a large company, it's hard to let people do different things if you have to keep track of 12,000 or 15,000 different ways of doing business. Whereas in the independent, the broker dealer, the firm has offloaded the expense and some of the liability, at least, but mostly the expense to us as an advisor. So if we want to get a big fancy office, that's up to us. We'll incur the obligation and pay the overhead, not the firm. Same thing goes for computers or phones or how much you spend to make your logo or marketing. Each of those things we get to decide for ourselves. And I think that's just really awesome. I enjoy that. I don't necessarily do anything tremendously fancy, but I also don't have to pay for things that I don't need. I don't pay for national ad campaigns that don't mean anything to me, or for Chamber of Commerce memberships I don't need, or stadium naming rights that may or may not, I think, be a good investment. We truly are business owners and have that kind of control, and I find that really liberating. The money is a nice advantage of being independent, but the main benefit to me, first and foremost, is the freedom and flexibility that we have. And that stuck out to me as I was investigating really over the 7 years I was in the business before I made the leap. It's really neat. So that's the background on how I got to be an independent advisor. I will talk a little bit more actually I could talk about my journey from there to now a little bit. As I had been investigating independence with the firm I'm with now, which I'll talk about in a minute, why I don't mention the name, I learned about the various ways to affiliate and how you choose which branch or OSJ to affiliate with, Office of Supervisory Jurisdiction as it's called. And that kind of became its own research project in terms of learning who did what and why, and usually it was about payout and not losing control and then that true feeling of independence. So over the first few years, I had discovered that there was probably a way to kind of collaborate and aggregate advisors that are affiliated with the same firm and share resources, and the parent firm would give you a little bit of whoever the branch manager, the OSJ manager was, give them a kind of a bonus for creating some scale. So I started out to do that, and I joined in the fall of 2009, got my clients moved over, and I had a couple of people that I knew, one that had come with me and two others the next year. So by the end of 2010, I was responsible for 3 people as the OSJ manager. And I had done a lot of networking and continued to push and spend time on this business idea. And in 2011, it took off, to say the least. So there was 3 of us, or 3 people that were in the network, so to speak, our little group. But the next 15 months, by the end of March of 2012, that group was up to 20 advisors. So I really had hit on something and enjoyed it, and pulling together my peers was all it was. but I really spent a lot of time and energy dedicated to it. Edward Jones at that time had a number of people going independent, so a lot of these were people I knew or referrals from people I knew, so that made it go a little bit faster. But a lot of the research and investigation and connecting I had done paid off, and it was pretty neat to see that. And so we created a little bit of community. That's one thing I think people worry about, but I felt that with a little bit of initiative, you could replicate it, and I think we've done a decent job of that. So the only issue was at that time I realized I had a great assistant, Teresa, who came with, or who helped me move. She helped a lot of these other people move. And I realized we're going to need some more support to keep up with the compliance work that would involve. So I started looking around and ended up merging that network with another smaller network of about 10 folks. And there were 2 partners that were working together. And we put our heads together in the spring and summer, early summer of 2012, and put ourselves together and had about 30 advisors. And over the next 2 years or so, we grew that to about 50. And we've now gotten to the point where we're looking for trying to make sure we're growing wisely. Now we've added staff so that we can continue to focus our own practices, as each of us has our own practice that we don't want to give up because we enjoy being advisors. So that network is by advisors for advisors, and we enjoy it, but we've hired some staff members, some really professional staff to help run it and continue to grow it, and we can focus on business development for that and oversight. So I'm very proud but also blessed and lucky to have what I would consider 2 separate businesses that I didn't have 6 years ago, my own practice, and then I'm a third partner in a nice sized network of advisors, and we think we do a good job for folks. The nature of this project is I wanted to be able to reach more people than just the folks that might be affiliated with our firm or that we might come across in our local or regional area. So I realized I could reach more people if I focused just on the going independent and not so much on a particular firm, ours or our parent broker-dealer, or the region. So I'm hoping this will reach people, if you're listening to this, far parts of the country from Texas. I hope that's great. And I'm happy to answer questions or give you my 2 cents. And because I think the independent model is worth examining pretty closely. If there are questions that you don't see answered, please shoot them to me or post them. I'm sure there are other people that have them. I wanted to do this before I get so deep into my independent career that I've forgotten what people ask. Certainly I'm still involved in onboarding new people, but I don't do that as much day to day. And I still remember the adrenaline I got when I moved both times. One thing I loved about building this network was when other advisors were making the move, I got to experience that same excitement and be involved. It can be intense, and when I was first helping people in 2010, 11, I spent a lot of time to make sure, try to help them position themselves as well as possible and make it work. And I think we did a pretty good job. And of course, those advisors had built the foundations. The relationships are the key point. But I was glad to help them share my knowledge. And again, before I forget too much of it and get too far away from the experience, I want to share it and hope it can be of use. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.